The late summer heat shimmered across the rocky slopes outside Prescott as Ethan Mitchell guided his horse along the steep mountain trail. 5 years after Appomattox, the former Confederate cavalry officer still carried himself with military bearing. Though his gray uniform had long since been traded for civilian garb, his weathered face bore the distant look of a man who had seen too much death, yet his eyes remained sharp as they scanned the rugged terrain. The abandoned mining claims that dotted these hills held as many broken dreams as they did silver ore. The crunch of loose shale beneath his horse's hooves echoed off the cliff walls as Ethan rounded a bend in the trail. He had come to Arizona territory seeking something he couldn't quite name. Perhaps redemption, perhaps just escape from the bitter aftermath of war. The silver boom had drawn him here like so many others, but he found himself more interested in the stories etched into these ancient rocks than in whatever wealth they might contain. A flash of movement caught his eye, a rattlesnake slithering between the rocks. But as Ethan watched more closely, he realized it was actually a thin tendril of dust rising from one of the old mine entrances up ahead. Someone or something was disturbing the stillness of the abandoned shaft. He reined his horse to a stop, years of cavalry training making him cautious of an ambush. The territory had grown increasingly lawless as drought drove desperate men to desperate measures. Drawing closer, Ethan heard a faint sound carrying on the hot breeze, words in a language he didn't recognize, spoken in tones of distress. He dismounted and approached the mine entrance carefully, one hand resting on the revolver at his hip. The shaft entrance was partially collapsed, with fresh debris suggesting a recent cave-in. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he made out a figure trapped beneath a fallen support beam, an elderly Native American man wearing traditional Navajo garments. "Hold on, friend," Ethan called out, holstering his weapon and hurrying forward. The old man's dark eyes studied him warily as Ethan assessed the situation. The beam had the man pinned at an awkward angle, but hadn't crushed him completely. With careful leverage, there might be a chance to free him. "My name is Ethan Mitchell," he said slowly, unsure how much English the man understood. "I'm going to try to help you. Please stay still." The rescue proved painstaking work in the stifling confines of the shaft. Ethan located a length of broken timber that could serve as a lever, and inch by inch managed to raise the beam enough for the old man to drag himself free. As they emerged into the sunlight, Ethan saw that his new companion moved with the measured grace of advanced age, though his eyes held profound wisdom. The man introduced himself as Benjamin, a name clearly adopted for dealing with white society. "You have my gratitude, Ethan Mitchell," Benjamin said in perfect, albeit accented English. "The spirits guided you here at the right moment. I am too old to have survived long in that dark place." He studied Ethan thoughtfully. "You move like a warrior, but there is conflict in your heart. Perhaps this meeting was meant to serve us both." The old man's perceptiveness was unsettling, cutting straight to truths Ethan thought he had buried deep. They made camp as the sun set, sharing coffee and trail bread. Benjamin explained he had been exploring the old mines, searching for signs of water seepage that might reveal hidden springs. The devastating drought had his people's livestock dying and crops withering in the fields. But there was ancient knowledge, he said, of a vast underground river that could sustain the entire territory, if only it could be found and accessed. "The water exists," Benjamin said, gazing into the flames. "Our ancestors knew of it, but that knowledge was lost when the Spanish came. Now a few corrupt men control what little water remains, growing rich while others suffer." He spoke of Jacob Perez, leader of a gang of bandits who had seized control of key water sources through violence and intimidation. They charged ruinous prices, turning the drought into profit while settlers and natives alike struggled to survive. As night deepened, Benjamin shared more of his people's history and beliefs. Ethan found himself drawn in by the old man's quiet wisdom and deep connection to the land. Here was something authentic, he realized, something meaningful beyond the endless cycles of violence and greed he had known. When Benjamin spoke of his vision for bringing life-giving water to all people regardless of race or allegiance, Ethan felt the stirring of a new purpose in his war-weary soul. The next morning, Benjamin sketched a crude map in the dirt, showing where he believed the underground river could be accessed, but claiming it would mean confronting Perez and his men, who would fight viciously to maintain their monopoly. It was a dangerous proposition, yet Ethan found himself unable to walk away. Perhaps this was why fate had guided him to this place. Not to strike it rich, but to help bring justice and renewal to a parched land. I'll help you, Ethan said finally, but we'll need more than just the two of us. Benjamin nodded, explaining that his grandson Noah served as a scout for the cavalry at Fort Whipple, outside Prescott. Through him, they might be able to gather allies and resources, but they would have to move carefully. Perez had informants throughout the territory and would kill anyone who threatened his control of the water trade. As they parted ways that afternoon, Ethan felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known since before the war. This was a chance to fight for something truly worthwhile. Not abstract political causes, but the basic needs of ordinary people. Benjamin's words about destiny echoed in his mind as he rode toward Prescott. Perhaps redemption could be found not in gold or silver, but in bringing water to a thirsty land. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the trail as Ethan guided his horse along the winding path toward Prescott. The terrain grew steadily more challenging, with loose shale and jutting rocks forcing him to pick his way carefully through the mountain passes. His thoughts kept returning to Benjamin's tale of the hidden spring, a lifeline that could transform the entire territory if they could wrest it from Perez's iron grip. As twilight approached, he made camp in a sheltered hollow, the dying light painting the rocky cliffs in shades of amber and purple. The peaceful scene belied the gravity of what lay ahead. Ethan had seen enough corruption during and after the war to know that men like Perez wouldn't relinquish their power without a fierce fight. He spent the evening reviewing Benjamin's hand-drawn map by firelight, memorizing the key landmarks that would guide them to the sacred water source. Dawn found him back in the saddle, pushing hard toward Fort Whipple. The growing heat reminded him why their mission was so crucial. Already the spring temperatures were climbing dangerously high, and summer hadn't yet arrived. He passed several abandoned homesteads, their sun-bleached timber telling silent stories of families driven away by the relentless drought. At midday, Ethan encountered a cavalry patrol led by a young lieutenant named Alexander. The officer knew Noah and confirmed he was indeed stationed at the fort, though currently out on a scouting mission. More troubling was Alexander's report that Perez's men had been seen increasingly often around Prescott, suggesting the water baron was expanding his influence northward from his base in Globe. The fort's weathered walls came into view late that afternoon. Ethan's arrival stirred interest among the soldiers, many of whom recognized his Confederate cavalry officer's bearing, despite his civilian clothes. A weathered sergeant named Jacob directed him to the quartermaster's office, where he learned Noah wasn't expected back for 2 more days. The delay was frustrating, but it gave Ethan time to gather intelligence and supplies. That evening in the fort's canteen, he met Clara, a young widow who ran the local general store. Her husband had died trying to dig a well on their ranch, another victim of the water crisis. Over coffee, she shared valuable information about Perez's operation, including details about his network of informants and the armed men who guarded his water sources. Her quiet anger matched Ethan's growing determination to end the baron's stranglehold on the territory. The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Frances, an aging prospector, approached Ethan with a proposition. She had discovered several promising gold deposits in the mountains, but lacked the water needed to work them properly. If Ethan and his companions could help secure a reliable water supply, she would provide funding and equipment for their endeavor. The offer was tempting, though Ethan wondered if involving gold might complicate their already dangerous mission. As he waited for Noah's return, Ethan began carefully laying groundwork. Through Clara's connections, he established a network of trusted locals who could provide safe houses and supplies when needed. Jacob, the fort sergeant, proved particularly helpful, sharing detailed maps of the territory and introducing Ethan to several reliable Apache scouts who knew the mountain paths intimately. The pieces were falling into place, but Ethan couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Word of his inquiries would eventually reach Perez's ears, and the water baron's reputation for brutal efficiency was well earned. They would need to move quickly once Noah returned, before their enemies could mobilize against them. As he studied the fort's surroundings from the walls that evening, Ethan spotted dust clouds rising from the southern trail, riders approaching at speed. Whether they brought aid or danger remained to be seen. The searing Arizona sun beat down on Ethan Mitchell as he guided his horse along the steep mountain trail leading to the Prescott mining district. The former Confederate cavalry officer's weathered face bore the marks of too many years spent squinting into harsh desert glare, but his eyes remained sharp as he scanned the rocky slopes. Something about the scattered debris and fresh scars in the earth caught his attention. signs of recent landslide activity that set his instincts on edge. Through the shimmering heat waves, he spotted an unusual gathering of buzzards circling a distant mine entrance. Drawing closer, he heard faint cries echoing from deep within the shaft. Without hesitation, Ethan dismounted and grabbed rope from his saddlebags, his military training kicking in as he assessed the partially collapsed tunnel opening. The cries grew clearer, definitely human, speaking what sounded like Navajo. Inside the mine, Ethan found an elderly Navajo man pinned beneath fallen support timbers. Speaking in halting Navajo learned during his post-war wanderings, Ethan learned the man's name was Benjamin Turner, a respected medicine man who had been searching sacred caves when the shaft collapsed. It took hours of careful work, but Ethan managed to free Benjamin without triggering further cave-ins. As they rested outside the mine, Benjamin revealed he had discovered something far more valuable than gold: an ancient aquifer feeding hidden springs throughout the territory. This water source could transform the drought-ravaged region, but a ruthless gang led by Alexander Perez had already seized control of several key water sources, charging extortionate rates to desperate farmers and ranchers. Benjamin's tale struck a chord with Ethan. He had seen too many good people driven to ruin by corrupt power brokers during and after the war. But Perez's operation was extensive, with armed men controlling key water access points across 3 counties. Taking them on would require careful planning and unlikely allies. Benjamin mentioned a woman named Helen Roberts, who had been gathering evidence of Perez's crimes. In Prescott, Helen Roberts proved to be more than just a source of information. The sharp-witted newspaper owner had spent months documenting Perez's operation while publishing carefully worded exposés that wouldn't attract dangerous attention. Her office walls were covered with maps marking Perez's territory and suspected storage locations. But she needed someone with military experience to turn intelligence into action. Their planning session was interrupted by Jacob Phillips, Helen's printer, bursting in with news. Perez's men were loading wagons with dynamite at the hardware store. Through her network of informants, Helen learned they planned to collapse several competing mines, including the shaft where Ethan had found Benjamin. The timing wasn't coincidental. Benjamin's discovery of the aquifer must have leaked somehow. That night, Ethan and Helen watched Perez's compound from a hillside vantage point. The operation was larger than expected. At least 30 armed men, with more arriving daily. Among them was Noah Turner, Benjamin's own grandson, apparently working as Perez's scout. The betrayal explained how Perez had learned of Benjamin's discovery so quickly. Family loyalty meant nothing compared to gold fever. Ethan knew they needed more allies, but the territorial authorities were either bought off or intimidated into silence. However, Helen suggested an unexpected solution: the female-led mutual aid societies that had sprung up during the drought. Women like Frances Phillips and Clara Mitchell had organized underground networks to share water and supplies while protecting vulnerable families from Perez's extortion. These informal alliances proved crucial as Ethan and Helen began gathering intelligence and resources. Frances's boarding house became their covert meeting place, while Clara's position as the telegraph operator let her monitor Perez's communications. Even Alice Turner, Noah's jilted fiancée, offered vital insights into his movements and weaknesses. A plan began taking shape, one that would require precise timing and complete surprise. Through Benjamin's knowledge and Helen's research, they identified the key pressure points in Perez's operation. The gang's water monopoly depended on controlling certain strategic springs and maintaining exclusive access to railway water towers. By coordinating simultaneous strikes on multiple locations, a smaller force could effectively cripple their distribution network before they could respond. But their planning hadn't gone unnoticed. One evening, Ethan caught Noah Turner lurking outside Frances's boarding house. Rather than confront him directly, Ethan followed the young man to an isolated spot and made him an unexpected offer: a chance to redeem himself by feeding false information to Perez. Noah's bitter response revealed his true motivation wasn't greed, but a misguided attempt to protect his grandfather from Perez's threats. This revelation added another layer to their strategy. While Noah continued apparently working for Perez, he began subtly manipulating the gang's patrol patterns and security arrangements. Meanwhile, the women's network slowly stockpiled water and supplies, preparing for the coming confrontation. Ethan knew they would only get one chance. If their coordinated strike failed, Perez's retaliation would be brutal. The tension built as summer heat baked the land to dusty hardness. Perez's men grew increasingly aggressive, shooting a farmer who refused to pay their water fees. The incident sparked outrage, but also fear. Most townspeople stayed locked inside, leaving the streets eerily empty. Yet behind closed doors, preparations continued as Helen's coded newspaper articles signaled the approaching day of action. As the summer dragged on, Ethan discovered disturbing news from his contacts in Prescott. Perez's operation extended far beyond simple water control. The Mexican bandits had begun forcing miners to sign over their claims, using the drought as leverage. Those who resisted found their water supplies mysteriously contaminated or their mining equipment sabotaged. The scope of corruption was larger than anyone had imagined. In the cool darkness of Benjamin's cave dwelling, the Navajo elder traced ancient waterways on a crude map, his weathered finger following invisible paths beneath the parched earth. The old ones knew where life flowed, he explained to Ethan and Noah. But some passages must remain hidden until the right time. The old man's cryptic words carried weight. He had refused to reveal the main water source's location until certain preparations were complete. Helen's latest coded message in the Flagstaff newspaper caught Ethan's attention. Suspicious shipments arriving nightly at Globe's abandoned silver mine. Through careful observation, Noah confirmed Perez was stockpiling weapons, not just controlling water. The pieces started fitting together. The bandits were planning to expand their operation across the entire territory once the drought forced enough desperate settlers to submit. Francis and Clara organized the women's networks with military precision, establishing secret water caches in root cellars and abandoned mine shafts throughout the region. Their careful planning would ensure the townspeople could survive the coming conflict. Alice, the schoolteacher, taught children to recognize which wells had been poisoned by subtle signs. Knowledge that saved 3 families when Perez's men tampered with more water sources. The turning point came when Alexander, a former Union scout now working as a freight hauler, arrived with news from Yuma. The territorial governor had been bought off. New water rights legislation would effectively legalize Perez's monopoly. They had less than 2 weeks before the law took effect. Ethan realized they needed to act before official authority gave the bandits even more power. Noah's position inside Perez's operation became increasingly dangerous as the gang grew paranoid about leaks. One night, he barely escaped detection, slipping away from a patrol that nearly discovered him meeting with Ethan. The close call left him shaken but more determined. "They're planning something big," he warned. "Perez keeps talking about a cleansing once the new law passes." Benjamin's health was failing as the relentless heat took its toll, but the old man's spirit remained strong. He spent hours teaching Ethan the sacred songs that would guide them to the hidden water source when the time came. "The path reveals itself to those who listen with pure hearts," he insisted. "The water knows its true guardians." His faith gave Ethan courage, even as the odds seemed increasingly overwhelming. The women's network discovered that Perez had spies in every major town, including some prominent citizens. Helen used this to their advantage, feeding false information through carefully chosen channels. Meanwhile, Francis coordinated with sympathetic ranchers to move cattle herds strategically, creating dust clouds that masked their true preparations from the bandits' lookouts. As tensions mounted, Ethan struggled with doubts about leading so many people into danger. Late one night, Clara found him staring at the stars outside the mine entrance. "My father used to say courage isn't about not being afraid," she told him quietly. "It's about doing what's right despite the fear." Her words stayed with him as they moved into the final phase of their plans. The decisive moment approached as summer storms gathered over the mountains. Benjamin performed a sacred ceremony, burning herbs and chanting ancient prayers for guidance and protection. That night, Ethan dreamed of clear water flowing through hidden chambers deep in the earth. When he awoke, he knew with certainty what they had to do. The time had come to reclaim the water and their freedom. The sun beat mercilessly on the cracked earth as Ethan Mitchell crouched behind a stack of empty water barrels at the edge of Globe's main mining operation. His Confederate cavalry experience had taught him the value of patience, but watching Alexander Perez's men guard the precious water supply while the townspeople suffered made his trigger finger itch. The Navajo elder's words echoed in his mind. The hidden spring deep within Shadow Mountain could sustain the entire territory, if only they could break Perez's iron grip on the region's water. Benjamin Turner shifted nervously beside him, the young prospector's hands tight around his Winchester. The workers are getting restless, Ethan. Helen says half the mining families can't afford Perez's water prices anymore. He referred to his wife, who ran the town's only boarding house and heard all the whispered complaints. The situation was reaching a breaking point faster than they'd anticipated. Through his brass spyglass, Ethan observed the intricate network of pipes and pumps Perez had constructed to control the water flow from the existing wells. The Mexican bandit leader had turned a natural resource into an instrument of power, charging extortionate rates while keeping armed guards posted day and night. But today's operation would change everything, if they could pull it off. Frances Roberts, the town's schoolteacher, had provided them with the crucial intelligence they needed. As the daughter of a mining engineer, she understood the complex water system better than anyone. She'd spent weeks carefully mapping the weak points while pretending to teach Perez's young son. Now she waited with the rest of their unlikely allies in the abandoned silver mine shaft, ready to execute their daring plan. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Ethan duck lower. Jacob Phillips, Perez's American-born enforcer, rode past their position with 4 armed men. Phillips had once been a respected lawman in Prescott before greed corrupted him. Now he was Perez's most dangerous weapon, clever, ruthless, and intimately familiar with the territory. His presence complicated their already risky strategy. A sharp whistle cut through the dry air, Clara Turner's signal that the water station's afternoon guard rotation was beginning. Ethan had initially doubted Benjamin's wife could play such a crucial role, but her position as a laundress for Perez's household had proved invaluable. She'd learned the guards' patterns while collecting linens, and now her intelligence would help them strike at the perfect moment. The plan hinged on the ancient tunnels the Navajo elder had revealed, a maze of natural passages that connected to both the hidden spring and the main mining complex. Noah Roberts, Francis's brother and an experienced explosives man, had spent days carefully placing charges throughout the network. When detonated, they would collapse key sections of Perez's water infrastructure while simultaneously opening a path to the untapped spring. Ethan checked his pocket watch. 10 minutes until the scheduled explosion. His mind drifted to Alice Phillips, Jacob's estranged sister, who had become their most unexpected ally. Her knowledge of her brother's tactics and her skill with traditional Navajo healing had already saved their group more than once. Now she waited with Francis and the others, ready to help guide the townspeople to safety when chaos erupted. The ground trembled slightly, the first warning tremor. Noah's expertise with dynamite was legendary in the territory, but they'd never attempted anything this complex. Success meant freedom from Perez's tyranny and a sustainable future for Globe. Failure meant death for everyone involved. Ethan drew his Colt revolver and nodded to Benjamin. It was time. The explosion rocked the mountainside with such force that several of Perez's guards were knocked from their feet. As planned, multiple charges detonated in sequence, the carefully timed blasts creating a symphony of destruction. Water pipes burst in spectacular geysers as support structures collapsed. Through the dust and confusion, Ethan led the charge toward the main pumping station. Jacob Phillips proved faster than expected, organizing a defense even as chaos erupted around them. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions, forcing Ethan's group to scatter for cover, but this too was part of the plan. Their attack was merely a diversion to draw attention while Francis led the townspeople through the ancient tunnels to the hidden spring. The battle intensified as more of Perez's men arrived, but they were fighting blind, unsure which parts of their water network remained stable. Ethan used this uncertainty to his advantage, leading them into crossfire zones prearranged with Benjamin and their other allies. The air filled with gun smoke and the sharp crack of rifles echoing off the mountain walls. Then Perez himself appeared, his elegant clothes coated in dust as he shouted orders in a mixture of Spanish and English. Ethan had expected the water baron to flee, but instead he fought with the desperate fury of a man watching his empire crumble. The personal nature of the conflict became clear. This was about more than just water rights. A massive secondary explosion shook the mountain, Noah's insurance plan detonating the main reservoir pipeline. The blast sent Perez's men scrambling as millions of gallons of precious water burst free from its artificial constraints. The sight of their carefully hoarded wealth literally evaporating into the desert air broke their will to fight. But Jacob Phillips remained dangerous in defeat. As his men fled, he charged straight at Ethan, guns blazing. The former Confederate officer dove behind a steel water tank, feeling bullets spark off the metal inches from his head. This was the moment he'd been both expecting and dreading. A final reckoning between two men who'd chosen opposite sides of justice. Their gunfight wove through the demolition debris, each man using the chaos to their advantage. Phillips was faster, but Ethan had positioned himself to drive his opponent toward the unstable ground near the collapsed tunnels. One wrong step could send either of them plunging into the network of caves below. The decisive moment came when Alice appeared on the ridge above them, calling out to her brother in their mother's native Navajo tongue. The momentary distraction was all Ethan needed. His bullet caught Phillips in the shoulder, spinning him against a wooden support beam already weakened by Noah's explosives. The structure gave way with a terrible crack. The support beam's collapse triggered a chain reaction, sending a cascade of timber and rock thundering down the mountainside. Ethan scrambled backward as Phillips disappeared beneath the avalanche, his final cry cut short by the deafening rumble. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and ancient mining tunnels began collapsing one by one, decades of precarious excavation finally giving way. Alice slid down the ridge face, her leather boots sending loose gravel skittering into the growing chasm. She grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him away from the edge as more of the mountainside crumbled. Behind them, the water tower groaned ominously, its steel legs buckling under the shifting earth. The precious liquid they'd fought so hard to protect now threatened to become their undoing. Through the dust and chaos, Noah emerged from the western tunnel, supporting Benjamin on his shoulder. The old Navajo elder's face was streaked with dirt and blood, but his eyes held a fierce determination. He pointed urgently toward a narrow cleft in the rock face that hadn't been visible before the collapse. Ancient petroglyphs, previously hidden by years of mining debris, now stood revealed in the fading sunlight. "The old ways survive," Benjamin wheezed in Navajo, his words carrying to Alice, who translated for the others. "The water spirits have shown us the true path." The group pushed through the opening, finding themselves in a natural chamber that seemed untouched by mining operations. The sound of rushing water echoed from somewhere deep below. Ethan's mining experience told him this was no ordinary cave system. The walls bore signs of ancient engineering, carefully carved channels and reservoirs that predated any European presence in the territory. This was the secret water source Benjamin had spoken of, hidden in plain sight beneath the very ground Phillips and his men had desecrated with their greed. As they ventured deeper, Helen and Francis appeared from a side passage, having navigated the old tunnels from the town's edge. The sisters carried maps and documents seized from Phillips' office, proof of his illegal water rights claims that had stolen from both settlers and native peoples alike. In death, his corruption would finally be exposed. The chamber opened into a vast underground lake, its crystal waters reflecting the light that filtered through natural shafts in the ceiling. Ancient steps, worn smooth by centuries of use, led down to the water's edge. Benjamin explained through Alice that this reservoir had sustained his people through countless droughts, its existence protected by generations of tribal elders. Noah examined the engineering with growing excitement, already formulating plans to integrate this natural system with more modern distribution methods. But it would have to be done right this time, with respect for both the land and its original custodians. The water would flow freely again, shared equally among all who called this harsh territory home. Ethan watched as Alice knelt beside the water, performing the blessing ritual Benjamin had taught her. His thoughts drifted to the long journey that had brought them here. From battlefields of civil war to this moment of reconciliation between peoples and with the land itself. The death of Phillips and his operation marked more than just the end of a water monopoly. It was the beginning of a new understanding. As they emerged from the hidden chamber, the setting sun painted the mountains in deep reds and purples. In Prescott, word was already spreading of Phillips' defeat and the discovery of the ancient water source. Ethan knew there would be challenges ahead, politicians and profiteers who would try to exploit this discovery. But looking at the determined faces around him, he saw a strength that no amount of greed could overcome. The group made their way down the mountain path, leaving behind the collapsed mine that had nearly become their tomb. Tomorrow would bring the hard work of rebuilding, establishing fair water rights, repairing damaged relations between communities, healing the wounds of distrust. But for now, they had won something more precious than gold or water. They had found hope in the wisdom of the past and the promise of a shared future, The summer sun blazed mercilessly over Prescott as Ethan Mitchell led his unlikely coalition toward their final confrontation. The former Confederate officer rode at the head of a mixed group of settlers, Navajo warriors, and reformed miners who had all suffered under the iron grip of Alexander Perez's water monopoly. Behind him, the elderly medicine man Many Stars, who had started this journey when Ethan pulled him from that collapsed shaft, chanted softly in his native tongue, blessing their endeavor. Benjamin Turner studied the crude map they'd drawn of Perez's compound, nestled in a defensible position among the copper-rich hills. The corrupt businessman had built his empire by damming the sacred spring Many Stars had revealed to them, choking off water to anyone who wouldn't pay his extortionate prices. Now, nearly 100 parched souls had rallied to their cause, knowing this might be their only chance to break his stranglehold on the region. The plan was elegantly simple, though fraught with risk. While Noah Phillips led a contingent of miners to create a diversion at the main gate, Ethan and a small team would infiltrate through the old tunnel network they'd discovered beneath the compound. Many Stars had confirmed these passages connected to the same system where he'd nearly met his end, before fate brought Ethan to his rescue. Frances Mitchell, Ethan's sister and a skilled healer, had insisted on joining the infiltration team. Her knowledge of medicinal plants had proven invaluable in treating the growing number of desperate townspeople suffering from dehydration and heat exhaustion. Now she carried bandages and supplies, knowing there would likely be casualties before the day was done. Her presence gave Ethan both comfort and concern. The sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the main gate. Noah's diversion was underway. Ethan led his group swiftly through the dark passages, guided by Many Stars' intimate knowledge of the mountain's veins. The old man's eyes seemed to glow with an inner light as he traced paths that had been sacred to his people long before gold-hungry settlers arrived to tear open the earth. They emerged into blazing sunlight near the heart of Perez's compound, where the businessman had built an obscene mansion using profits squeezed from the suffering of others. Through the windows they could see him directing his men, oblivious to the threat approaching from below. Clara Turner, Benjamin's wife and an expert markswoman, took up position with her rifle while the others spread out. The battle that followed would be remembered in Prescott for generations. Perez's men found themselves caught between Noah's frontal assault and Ethan's team striking from within. Many Stars raised his arms to the sky and began a thunderous chant that seemed to shake the very mountain. Whether by coincidence or divine intervention, the ground trembled, and the dammed spring burst forth with explosive force. Water cascaded down the hillside as Perez's carefully constructed barrier crumbled. The sight of it flowing freely once again drew cheers from the townspeople who had gathered to witness the confrontation. Perez himself attempted to flee, but was caught by Helen Roberts, the widow whose husband had died of thirst in Perez's debtor's prison. She didn't kill him. Justice would come through proper channels now that his crimes were exposed. In the aftermath, as the water found its natural course again, Many Stars performed a ceremony of blessing. He taught Ethan and the others how to be proper stewards of the spring, sharing the ancient wisdom that had protected it for centuries before greed drove men to claim it for themselves. The town council established a new charter, ensuring the water would remain free for all, managed jointly by settlers and Navajo representatives. Frances established a clinic near the spring, combining her medical training with the healing traditions Many Stars shared with her. The partnership between the townspeople and the Navajo grew stronger as they worked together to rebuild. Ethan found purpose in his new role as mediator between the cultures, finally laying to rest the ghosts of his Confederate past. Alexander Perez faced trial in Flagstaff, where evidence of his numerous crimes led to a lengthy prison sentence. The money he'd hoarded was used to compensate his victims and fund improvements to the region's water infrastructure. Noah Phillips and Benjamin Turner established a mining cooperative that prioritized environmental protection, guided by Many Stars' wisdom about maintaining harmony with the land. As summer turned to autumn, Prescott flourished under its new water management system. The partnership forged in crisis became a model for other territories, proving that cooperation could triumph over greed. Ethan often visited the spring where his journey began, marveling at how a chance encounter in a dark mine shaft had led to such profound changes. The water flowed freely, a symbol of renewal and hope in the harsh desert landscape. The winter brought new challenges as Ethan and Many Stars worked to formalize agreements between the mining cooperative and local tribes. In the council chambers of Prescott, They drafted documents that would protect both the water rights and sacred lands, while ensuring sustainable development. The old warrior's weathered hands traced the maps as he shared stories of how his ancestors had maintained balance in these mountains for generations. Ethan noticed how the other council members now listened with respect, rather than the dismissive attitudes of the past. Benjamin Turner's engineering expertise proved invaluable as they developed innovative water-sharing systems. He designed a network of channels and reservoirs that followed the natural contours of the land, minimizing disruption to the ecosystem. The project employed many former miners who'd lost work when Alexander's operations shut down, giving them new purpose and skills. Noah Phillips supervised the construction, his previous experience with traditional mining methods helping bridge the gap between old and new approaches. In Globe, the changes met some resistance from those who'd profited under the old system. A group of former Perez loyalists attempted to sabotage one of the main aqueducts, but the community's swift response demonstrated how times had changed. Navajo and settler families worked side by side to repair the damage, their shared determination stronger than any lingering prejudices. The incident only served to strengthen the bonds between communities. As spring approached, many stars led Ethan to a hidden canyon where ancient petroglyphs told the story of previous droughts and how the people had survived them. The old man explained how each generation had faced its own trials, but wisdom passed down had helped them endure. Ethan realized that their current struggles were part of a much longer story, one that would continue long after they were gone. This understanding gave deeper meaning to their efforts to protect the water and land. The mining cooperative's first year proved remarkably successful, not just in profits but in environmental stewardship. By following many stars' guidance about when and where to dig, they avoided the destructive practices that had characterized previous operations. The miners learned to read the land's signs, understanding that long-term sustainability mattered more than quick gains. Even skeptics had to admit that this new approach brought more stable prosperity than the boom and bust cycles of the past. In Flagstaff, the territorial governor took notice of their success. He commissioned a study of their methods, hoping to implement similar reforms across the territory. Ethan found himself traveling between communities, sharing their experience and helping others establish their own cooperative agreements. Each town presented unique challenges, but the fundamental principles of respect and collaboration proved universally applicable. Many stars' health began to fail as summer approached again, but he expressed satisfaction in seeing his people's wisdom finally recognized and applied. On his last visit to the sacred spring, he told Ethan that the true wealth of the land had never been gold or silver, but the knowledge of how to live in harmony with it. The former Confederate officer, once driven by bitter memories and regret, had found redemption in becoming a guardian of these ancient truths. The transformation of the territory continued, with new partnerships forming between previously antagonistic groups. The water flowed more freely than ever, managed now with an understanding that transcended mere economics. In Prescott, where the story had begun, a memorial was erected not to battles or mining strikes, but to the wisdom that had saved them all. Ethan's name was included, but he knew the real victory belonged to the land itself and those who had learned to listen to its lessons. As autumn returned, Ethan stood at the entrance to the mine shaft where he'd first found many stars. The opening had been sealed, the scars of mining gradually healing as nature reclaimed the site. But the changes that had begun there continued to spread, like ripples in a desert spring, touching lives far beyond the mountains where an unlikely friendship had changed everything. The territory's future now held promise not of gold, but of something far more precious: the wealth of understanding between peoples and their shared connection to the life-giving waters of their homeland.